Hello everyone, welcome to Setting the Board Agenda. I'm thrilled to be here today with Homaira Akbari. Homaira, who sits on the board of Banco Santander and Landstar Systems, as well is the author of The Cyber Savvy Boardroom, Essentials Explained. And we're gonna go in and talk about cybersecurity and what the board needs to know. But before we jump in, Homaira, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here, and I'm very excited about this conversation. I am president and CEO of Acknowledged Partners, which is an advisory firm advising private equity and venture capitalists on their investment thesis, but also their portfolio companies, and specifically mentoring CEOs and executive committee on their strategy and operational challenges or growth strategies. You mentioned two of the boards that I'm currently on, but if you look at least the last 15, 20 years of my career, I have been on 6 different public boards across 5 different countries, which is very unusual, and 15 private boards over my career time. So I have had what I would say extensive governance experience. If you add all of that up for public companies, it's like the equivalent of 35 years, and for private, it is dramatically more even.
So Homaira, tell me about the experience in your first public company boardroom.
So my very first public board was, I remember, January 2013. And it is, you're shy. You walk in and you feel, even though you've been on private boards in the past, but when you realize you have a big fiduciary responsibility and duty of care, and to all shareholders and all stakeholders, not just shareholders, to employees and whatnot. So we walk into the room and you feel like, where would I sit? What would I say? Of course, you read A to Z of the material, which is maybe 10 years later, it's less of the case. But that first time you're super prepared, but you haven't integrated the material with it in your head. And yeah, it's I would say it could be intimidating feeling to come in and seeing all other board members and the management.
And so you've written a book on the Cyber Savvy Boardroom, Essentials Explained. So what's the role and importance of the board when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, the importance is quite high. First of all, maybe we should back up and understand why cybersecurity has become such an important topic in the boardroom. And the reason for it is really, I divide it into 3 pieces. The first piece is it's just cybersecurity topic is becoming bigger and bigger. And why? Because of the attacks that, you have more frequent attacks now, and companies are getting breached. And no matter which company you are, don't tell me you haven't been breached, because if you haven't, you probably have been and you don't know,
yeah.
Or you will be very soon.
Yeah.
Secondly, these attacks are becoming bigger in terms of financial and non-financial damage. And thirdly, it used to be that the cyber attacks were only targeted towards certain sectors, like financial services, for example. But today is across all sectors. And why? It's because of ransomware. Ransomware completely changed the domain of cybersecurity and who gets targeted, because anybody, including municipalities, private even sort of companies, can be attacked by ransomware because there is actually money involved. And second reason is cybersecurity is really, if you think about it, is converging with areas such as privacy, physical security, fraud, AML, anti-money laundering, and what is called KYC, know your customer. And that's quite important. And lastly is regulatory pressure. You're having huge regulatory pressure from regulators, and we are seeing big fines, big penalties, and now legal suits, not just against the companies, but against CISOs and against specific individuals.
And given you sit on public companies and private companies, I'm sure there are many things in common across cybersecurity and the way boards should look at it, but are there differences across public and private companies? On cybersecurity in particular?
Yeah, to some extent. At the end of the day, I said earlier, ransomware does not recognize whether you're public and private, because with ransomware, your operations gets completely disrupted. You can't do anything anymore. You can't take orders, depending on what they have targeted, but frequently you can't take orders, you can't function, so you're going to hurt. Nevertheless, in terms of public companies, it becomes, it's under regulation.
Sure.
Regulation hasn't been extended yet to private companies, although I think it will be at some point soon. But also the other thing is that, you have the regulations. On top of that, you have stakeholders, you have your shareholders, many companies who have been targeted by cybersecurity breaches, their share price have kind of dived immediately. So there are a lot of pressures all around.
And how do you advise companies or boards to make sure that an organization has cybersecurity as an integrated part of their strategy?
Well, in fact, if you look at all of these regulations, like SEC disclosure ruling, which came into effect in mid-December of last year, is really targeting that. So there are two areas that cybersecurity has been, I would say, deficient. One is it was treated as a siloed area. The risk of cybersecurity wasn't as much part of the enterprise risk management, which that's what really many of the regulations try to address, that you can't really keep it separately, which comes back to how do you make sure the board manages it? So it's, first of all, it's a risk-based approach.
Yep.
And second is they really have to make it inherently part of enterprise risk management.
So start with enterprise risk management and make sure then within that, you're putting the right level of emphasis on
Exactly.
cyber.
That's exactly right.
Just out of curiosity, do you think private companies look at enterprise risk management in the same way that public companies, or they're just maybe less mature at it?
Depends. The large private companies are doing it very similarly. Younger ones, no. I mean, at the end of the day, enterprise risk management requires resources and investment. And it's just like everything else. As your company becomes more mature, you make those investments. As your company is less mature, you don't make those investments. But all in, no question, private companies, I can't remember many private companies that have been on board and they say, here's my enterprise risk management. Because in public boards, many companies actually have risk committees.
Sure.
And even if they don't, audit committee covers that in depth. And there they have to have these things. They're reporting to a board, but in private company, you don't have those. You never have. I've never seen risk committee, for example. You have audit committee, but it's much more financially focused. So then there is less attention or less focus from board members on on risk in general when you're in a private company.
And so one of the challenges that I often hear from clients and from boards is how do you get the right level of cyber expertise on your board? How do you think about that, and how do you advise companies?
So it is my belief, I'm myself a cybersecurity professional, so it is my belief that you would want to have that cybersecurity sort of knowledge base in your board, whether it is through one individual or several individuals. I think best in class is just like other skill matrix sort of that many boards use, where they say, okay, I need diversity, I need financial knowledge, I need operational knowledge, I need industry knowledge. Cybersecurity should be, I need IT and cybersecurity knowledge, or just cybersecurity knowledge. And you have to see how many of your board members checkmark that box, i.e. they come with prior knowledge and deep knowledge. So, my recommendation, have at least one, preferably 3. But then on top of that, what you want to do is, in fact, every board member should understand cybersecurity to some level, which is why my co-author and I published Cyber Savvy Boardroom. And the whole concept of that is to really give a mental model and basic knowledge of cybersecurity to every board member. So it is our belief every board member has to have certain level of knowledge, just like financial. You have to have certain level of knowledge of financial. And I think only then you have a very performing board when it comes to cybersecurity risk.
You've been on many boards, public company boards, private boards, and I'm sure you've seen a wide range of CISOs at those boards. What's the right level of dialogue between the CISO and the board? How frequently should they come and communicate with the board, and what is that engagement level that you expect?
Yeah, so my recommendation is at the minimum, and this is really, really the minimum, the CISO should directly report to the board twice a year.
That's same for public and private companies.
And that's right, either. But potentially the CISO, my preference would be that they would come in every sort of audit committee. Let's say you have, not every, but at least 4 times a year, i.e. on a quarterly basis, to go into audit committee and make a report. Secondly, in all cases, I always believe that there should be discussions off board. So for example, if you're especially a cybersecurity specialist, you want to have many frequent conversations with your CISO because you've thought about something, because you believe certain ways, you've seen some best practices in another company that you want to discuss with your CISO. So I think that's all very important. One of the things that should be avoided if CISO is reporting to CIO, which in many cases are, and that's absolutely fine, is not to have the CISO in the boardroom. You have to have the CISO in the boardroom. You have to make sure that they have the ability to communicate with the board
directly.
And to tell them not just what are positive things, not just about the cybersecurity roadmap, but also what are their challenges and what are the risk indicators and where do you feel the vulnerabilities and weaknesses might be and what investments do you need to address those.
And what advice would you give to CISOs? In the way they interact and communicate with the board when they're up in front of the board?
Yes, not to be shy and not to be, be very comfortable and tell them about your challenges and tell them about where you think the gaps are. And because, majority of the time the board say, what can we do for you? How can we help that you do your job better? At least up to very recently, and I think we will continue for many, still for some good period, I think there are a lot of CEOs and CFOs where they look at cybersecurity as a cost center. And if they need to make higher profitability for every reason that I'm sure they have, one of the areas that they could focus on is like, I don't want to spend that money on cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is not cheap.
Yeah.
So it is, if for large companies, it's 5 to 10% of their total IT spend. And we're talking about $12 billion, $15 billion.
It's among the biggest risk.
Yes.
It should be investing in reducing risk. So.
Exactly.
So a couple rapid fire questions for you, Homaira. What is the biggest risk you've ever taken?
The biggest risk I've ever taken is I had a very cushiony, highly paid management consulting position, but I got the bug in me to go and run business and be a P&L owner because I had never P&L ownership. And I took that risk, and it wasn't a straight line. But at the end, I did run several companies, became chief operating officer, general manager, and CEO, and I very much enjoyed it.
Love that.
So it paid off.
Now, if you go back to, you talked about your first board that you sat on, your first public company board. What advice would you give to other directors for their first board meeting?
That's a hard one. I don't know for the first board. I mean, certainly for the very first boards, listen, figure out listen more than ever you talk, but do say a few things because you don't want to be like, oh, he or she doesn't know anything. You ask whatever your area of expertise is, ask some questions in that area. But what I like to give as advice as a whole is be an independent thinker. And a lot of board members are followers. Don't be a follower. Have your own views, your own opinions, and do express them when, even when it's adversarial, because that is your role.
That's what good governance should be. Some healthy debate and different points of view.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Homaira. I thought that was great. And thank you for everyone for joining, setting the board agenda.